All right. Come on now. There we go. Tweet that out. Get on here. Record. Hello there, and welcome to a special edition. And I guess the next hour or so will determine how special it is, but we're on a different day than we normally are with the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Normally Thursday mornings, but March is madness, as everybody knows. Scott and I all over the place. Him in Indy last week, me going to Chicago this week, and who knows what next week will bring. So we will, we'll keep you posted. Check our social media feeds. We'll keep you posted on if and when we can pod next week. It's going to depending on what we have to do, where Scott is assigned with the Athletic, and what I'm doing, whether I'm going with the men or staying back for the women. But we will let you know for sure. But today we are here, and it is Wednesday, March the 8th, a little after 9 a.m. Central Time. We've got plenty to talk about. We're going to focus a lot today on Iowa basketball, men's basketball, a little bit women's basketball, kind of do a little look ahead with wrestling. We'll focus on that more next week when we get to the seedings, and right before nationals, we'll have time to do that. But we talked a lot about the racial discrimination lawsuit on Monday's podcast, so I'll refer people to that. We'll hit on some things that have happened since then at the end of this podcast, but right now we're going to dig in with basketball. As I said, it's Wednesday, March the 8th, a little more than 24 hours from now. Iowa will take the court at the United Center in Chicago and play the winner of Wisconsin and Ohio State. Scott, I talked to you before we started. That's Scott Dochterman from The Athletic, by the way, the other guy. I pointed the wrong way.
It's all right. It's all good. We're all over the place today. That's for sure.
I was asked on Todd Bromelkamp's radio show yesterday, which is a better matchup for Iowa, Wisconsin or Ohio State? I said Ohio State. Iowa is what? 1 in 3 against these teams this year. So that's interesting. And 0-2 against Wisconsin. I know it's hard to beat a team 3 times in a season, or at least that is the thought out there. That's kind of the, what people say. I don't know how accurate that is. Maybe it is. Maybe Scott knows. I think I would rather see Iowa play Ohio State. And basically my reasoning for that is, when I've watched Ohio State this year, it looks like some talented pieces that have not come together. That could happen in Chicago. Who knows? But Wisconsin, say what you will about them, I don't think they're overly talented, but they play as a team and they play a style that gives Iowa fits. What say you, Scott Dochterman?
I don't know. That's really the biggest fact of the thing.
That's why you come to this podcast, for that type of breakdown.
I know.
Insight.
I feel like we're on Major League now. You're Bob Uecker, and I'm sitting there, drinking whiskey. That's what's funny, because
I could use some whiskey this week.
I looked at this whole thing, the Big Ten tournament, the tournament next week that starts. And the 3 big words that stand out to me is I don't know, because everything looks like a jumbled piece of jambalaya, really. When you look at the way the Big Ten has been all year, other than Purdue and Minnesota, nothing else has been certain. Look at Iowa's losses they lost twice to Nebraska. They lost twice to Wisconsin, and then they've beaten Rutgers twice, and they've beaten Northwestern twice. So nothing about this year makes sense for anybody in this league. And, they swept Indiana, so it's just, this is such a jacked up league, and it's a jacked up year. I think we're going to have an incredible amount of fun. And I dare say, I would not be surprised if, how like ESPN says there's still 6 brackets intact at the end of Sunday. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of Saturday they're all gone, because I think there could be some major league chaos, particularly for Iowa. I agree with you about the Wisconsin angle, which is They're not talented. This is not the Wisconsin team we saw with Frank Kaminsky and Josh Gasser and Sam Decker and all those guys. However, they do play hard, as you said. They do play smart. They play physical. They defend. They do all the right things. And but I also could see Iowa saying, getting on a roll and just creaming them. I could see it being a 25-point win too. Ohio State, for the same factor, I could see if Iowa plays sloppy, and if Ohio State even wins a game, maybe they'll just go into it with a, let's just go see what we can do, and then they actually put together a run because they do have some talent. I think if they fall apart, it's going to be in game one. And that's for them.
Ohio State, you mean?
Yeah. I think they could fall apart against Wisconsin. If Wisconsin defends them, they just don't care. They quit. They lose by 15. So then it'll be Wisconsin. If they care, it might be a game, and then they might win. And then if they win, they're like, we beat this team before. We blew them out. We blew them out by 16 points at home. Let's see what we could do here. And it's been a few years, but remember how Iowa just fumbled every opportunity when they were a higher seed in the Big Ten tournament for all those years where they were losing to, 12 seeds and 11 seeds and every year seemingly. So I get back to my original response. I don't know. I'm just, does the Iowa team that played for 35 minutes against Nebraska shows up, or the Iowa team that played the last 5 that missed its last 6 shots and 9 out of its last 10? If that happens, if I was Gary Bart, I'd say take the bus home. You don't need to fly. But if the Iowa team that plays against Indiana, they'll play till Sunday. I mean, it's just, and I think you could make the same case for every team other than Purdue that you could see a similar scenario. They could be
in
one
Minnesota.
Done. Yeah, in Minnesota. Although that'd be great if they won today, but because they've played hard. I'll give them that, that they're not talented at all, but they've played hard. I mean, they played hard the other day and almost beat Wisconsin. So, they're probably not getting out of today, but I would say other than Purdue, you could see a case where, they could be one and done, or they could go to Sunday. Now, Purdue, not to say, they could be upset too, but I just think that they're a more complete product than everybody else.
Yeah, agreed. They've shown some vulnerability here down the stretch, but still at its best, Purdue is the best team in the league. Mm-hmm. And we'll see if that happens. These teams don't always play their best. It gets underway today, as we said, Ohio State and Wisconsin, 5:30 Central Time on the Big Ten Network. And that is followed by Minnesota and Nebraska. The winner of the Minnesota-Nebraska gets Maryland, the 6th seed, tomorrow. We'll get things started tomorrow with the 8-9 game at 11 a.m. on the Big Ten Network, and that is Rutgers and Michigan, 2 teams firmly on the bubble that need a win. And then after that, it'll be the Ohio State-Wisconsin winner against Iowa, Penn State and Illinois, another interesting matchup. And then, as I said, the Minnesota-Nebraska winner gets Maryland. And then the top 4 seeds, Purdue is 1, Northwestern is 2, Indiana is 3, Michigan State is 4. If Iowa survives on Thursday, it would get another game with Michigan State and Tom Izzo, a team that I think we all remember Iowa rallied against for an improbable victory, Carver Hawkeye Arena recently. And it's facing Izzo in the Big Ten tournament is a maybe not a tall task, but it's not easy in the sense that it's Izzo. He works the officials. His teams tend to play physically, to the point where it's hard to call everything, particularly on a neutral court. Or at the Breslin Center. And Iowa needs to be prepared for that. Iowa, if it gets to that point, needs to be prepared for a physical game and the ability to play through it.
Right. And Iowa has played, to say at least, poorly on the road. I mean, shot it certainly poorly on the road and or away from Carver Hawkeye Arena. And I think that's something that you've got to be prepared for. And you know what you're going to get with Tom Izzo. There are no secrets there. And it's a well-prepared, well-coached team that was up on Iowa by 13 points at home until a minute and a half to go. And Iowa came back with one of the most improbable games I've ever seen in my life. And I think you just kind of tip your cap. But I guarantee that that's something that, with a fairly short turnaround, only a couple of weeks later, that Tom Izzo and Michigan State will remember. And it wouldn't be, and they've had two really close, entertaining games this year. I mean, you've had over there at East Lansing, it was one shot away from winning it for Iowa, and Peyton Sanford missed it. This time, Peyton Sanford hit it, and then they won it overtime in a widely entertaining, incredible game. But here's the thing. In away games, Iowa shoots 28.5% from three. That's up because of how they performed at Indiana. That was the outlier in this. So I've seen them at the United Center shoot very, 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 very poorly. And so I'm not, again, it's hard to tell with this team. You just don't know what you're going to get. But I would say I would not put the odds on that Iowa goes to Sunday. I think, as you said, if it's Wisconsin, you're going to get a defensive effort for a team that struggles to shoot on the road. If it's Ohio State, you're probably getting a team that's pretty talented, that's probably got an IDGAF factor to it. I don't give a bleep, that, hey, and if they get to that point and they're like, yeah, we beat these guys, we can, and let's have some fun, then it could be, it could come down to the end. And then if you get past that game, you're going to get Michigan State, you're going to get a game effort, and that's going to be very, very tough. So if I was a betting person, I would not bet on Iowa to win it. Last year, I thought they had a chance to do some damage, with Wake Keegan-Murray was playing late. And of course they proved it significantly. They were awesome. They had, the Northwestern game was a big win and, gigantic win. And then great late game heroics from Jordan Bohannon and then beating Purdue for the championship. It would surprise me greatly if they were to get to Saturday, let alone Sunday.
And it's interesting, Scott. I've seen different projections on where Iowa sits right now in terms of seeding for the NCAA tournament. It's in. Yeah. It's just a matter of where it ends up. And that's what it's playing for this week, obviously. Not that I'm breaking any news there, but I think Iowa probably has to win Thursday to get off the 8-9 line. If they lose on Thursday to a team that probably isn't going to the tournament, whether it be Ohio State or Wisconsin, not good. And I think that puts you in the 8-9 game. You win that game, play close against Michigan State on Friday. I think the 7's in play.
Yeah. Right now I see them anywhere from 7 to 10. It wouldn't surprise me if they're on the 9-10 line right now, because they still have a really low net. I mean, they're not in good shape there. I mean,
where are they?
They're 37 is last I saw, which is up somewhat from where they were last week, but still it's not, when you start throwing out some pretty good teams, and a lot of these one bid tournaments, you're having some upsets, which you always do. And that's an 8, 9, 10 territory. Now, does strength of schedule figure into it? How much do the quad one wins figure into it and their seeding? That's where I think they can make up some ground and maybe get up to, as you said, a 7. But right now, I think they're in, if the tournament started today, I think they're at best an 8 and probably more like a 9 or a 10. Of course, there's no damn difference between a 9 and an 8. I mean, they play each other and it's just the uniform color. But I think you got to look at it this way. If they win and play competitive with Michigan State, then they're probably a 7 or an 8. If they lose, then they could probably fall as far as 10, because then it also depends on what else happens in the Big 10 and Big 12, to that matter, and ACC, because there's a lot of those teams are on the bubble themselves, or they're jostling for position. I mean, Oklahoma State and West Virginia are on the bubble, or West Virginia's, even though they got a terrible record, has a really high net. And then what does Maryland do? What does Illinois do? What does Michigan State do? Rutgers, even a Penn State. I don't know what you think, but I think out of the three teams that are squarely on the bubble, for maybe on the other side of the bubble for the Big Ten, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Michigan, I like Penn State the best, but Michigan being second best. But still, there's a lot of factors here, and if another team wins 2 games in the tournament, and NC State or West Virginia, even Providence, then that could slide Iowa down if they struggle.
And it's just a really wonky resume for Iowa. The bad losses, and then, they, as you said, Indiana's the number 3 seed in this tournament. They swept them.
Swept number 2 Northwestern.
Yeah. No, they lost at Northwestern.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, they split with Northwestern, split with Michigan State.
Yeah.
Then lost the only game to Purdue. So if you look at that, you're like, wow. Mm-hmm. But then you go and they lost twice to the 11 seed.
Right.
Nebraska. So that's a really uneven resume that they have to, look over. And Jamie Pollard's in the room.
Yeah. Hey, but then they beat his team by 20 points.
Yeah, true.
And Iowa State, to me, is kind of on the other side in just as weird a fashion, because you look at some of their non-conference losses, it's just unreal. I mean, Missouri, they got buried by Missouri. They got buried by Iowa and UConn. And the North Carolina win, when North Carolina was number 1, does not look good.
No.
Because they are the only reason why they're on the bubble is because their name is North Carolina. And then, as you said, Iowa got swept by number 11 and number 12 and split with number 13. So they're 2 and 4 against 11, 12, and 13 in this league. That's there's some issues there. But they're not unique. That's the one thing about this tournament, and it's going to happen, is when you look at Alabama, it could be a 1 seed. They got buried by Oklahoma. Yeah. Oklahoma's not even going to get in.
They're under 500.
Right. So that's why I think this tournament next week, no matter what happens, will be one of the most incredible, crazy tournaments we've ever seen, because there's just, if you were to tell me an 8 beats a 9, I will not be surprised. Kansas is the only one that I think is a little bit better than everybody else. But if they get a bad matchup, I mean, let's face it, a good Illinois, what if Illinois is an 8? What if Iowa's an 8 and they play in Des Moines? That's a matchup they're going, damn, we got to play them,
Yeah.
Versus if they're playing Florida Atlantic or something, then they're like, okay, we got the Sweet 16 and we're going to Kansas City.
I think, as we said, there's a lot for Iowa to play for here. Because I think with each win, you increase the positives and kind of tamp down those bad losses. If you get in here and are able to avenge the loss against the 2 losses against Wisconsin, you get them this time. That's one in your corner. You get Michigan State, and that's, you've beaten them 2 out of 3 times. Then you start to push your seeding up a little bit. But as we said, you go out and you lose tomorrow. Now you put yourself in a really, really tough spot. And we've seen Iowa in that spot before, whether it be against Villanova in Brooklyn or against Gonzaga in Seattle. Those are just hard matchups, Scott.
Yeah. The good thing, again, is that
there aren't those. Yeah, there's more parity this year. I will agree with that.
Yeah. But then again, this isn't a flawless Iowa team either. No. And they're capable of losing any of those games, including a first round game in the NCAA tournament or one here. And that's just, they're going to have to shoot. I think if you're going to tell me what's one thing that they're going to have to do, they're going to have to shoot from 3, because not only is their, field goal percentage way down, on the road. I mean, they shoot 41.2% on the road versus 48.8 at home. But 3-point percentage is where they just are a disaster, when they're 38 or whatever it is at Carver, and what 28 at home. I
And
mean,
that's
on
a
the
big
road.
difference, man.
Yeah, I mean,
Peyton Sanford did say they're practicing with Wilson basketballs because he. So I don't know how much the ball factors into it.
Yeah, remember that? That was a big deal for
that was the Maryland, right? The Under Armour ball at Maryland.
And then this year, the Northwestern Wisconsin, the reason why they struggled so much apparently was, which I'm like, those are excuses. You knew about the ball. Don't complain about it. Shut up. That's really, and I'm not talking about the players. I'm talking about some of the fans that are, somebody needs to look into the ball. Well, you know what? Everybody does it. What they need to do is make shots and figure it out. So no, it's so this whole thing is FUBAR, as we know. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be hectic. I do think that how they play might be a precursor to how they perform the next week. But then again, last year it wasn't. Last year they played so well in the Big Ten tournament, and then use whatever analogy you want, and then none of them are good about how they perform against Richmond. Yeah, crap their pants, crap the bed, whatever. A lot of other things, and against Richmond. So who knows? And maybe they flame out, and then they go to the Sweet 16, and then they're like Iowa State last year. That was 7-11 in the Big 12, and then goes to the Sweet 16, and instantly forgets about the regular season. So this is, but hey, it's entertainment, and there's really no. There's no way around it.
And we saw Sunday as well, Scott, against Nebraska. Iowa can shoot the ball well and still lose. It has to show interest in playing defense. I thought the rotations were awful on Sunday. Give Nebraska credit. It hit shots. Iowa didn't shoot as well as it normally does, but still shot well enough to win, scored enough to win, but just got open shooters and just looked a step slow on defense. And again, you could do that and another team isn't shooting well and you get away with it. Mm-hmm. But that's a really tough, tight wire act to walk. You gotta put it out there on defense. And then maybe that leads to some offense. That leads to the break. You use the press a little bit more maybe at times and generate some turnovers there. It's often been about defense, right? During the Fran McCaffrey era. And when they lose, they may not shoot well. There may be other turn the ball over more than they normally do, but you can usually look at the defense and say that was a factor of some sort in a loss.
If you look at their last 9 games, Rob, 6 of those games, the other teams shot more than 50% from the field. 2 other ones, they were 1 shot away from 50% from the field. The only one that was bad was Indiana last week, and they were at home, and they just played so poorly right from the very beginning and couldn't do anything right, whereas Iowa could do nothing wrong. But when you look at, Wisconsin shot, 52% for the game. Ohio State shot 57% and still lost. Why? Because Iowa shot 16 more shots. Yeah. So it comes down to rebounding as well and that sort of thing. And, Iowa was able to get 11 more rebounds that day. I think, no, 8 more. I'm sorry. But, that was, so it's going to be about defense, to at least slow down the other team, because this is a team that only when they had Aaron White and Jared Utoff and Adam Woodbury were they good, in defense. They were like 3rd in the Big Ten. The rest of the years they've been last or close there to it under Fran McCaffrey. And how they compensated, well, it's offense to defense, whereas like in football, it's the other way around. It's always football. It's always first, with defense. So I think in this case, what you do is if you can slow them down, press, get in transition, rebound after misses. So that means that if they make it, fine, move on. If they don't, you try to be there for the set to get the rebounds and then move the ball up the court. Because if they can do that, it doesn't really matter what the other team shoots or how the other team scores. They will win those games. But if not, or if they're shooting poorly from 3, forget about it. It's going to be a nasty game for them.
Yeah, you need it's really important for Perkins and Eulis to pressure the ball, to make post passes difficult. Iowa's not the biggest team in the world. It just kind of makes everything that Scott talked about, rebounding easier. All of those things become easier when you pressure the ball, and you have to be good in rotations. And when teams move the ball side to side, you have to move side to side. You've got to at least get a hand in the shooter's face. They did not do that enough on Sunday, and it bit them. And again, credit to Nebraska for hitting those shots. But Wisconsin has a way of making those shots too when you leave them wide open. So it's a different offense. I get it, but also like Nebraska, more defensive oriented is Wisconsin. So kind of a similar matchup there if that happens. And then Ohio State obviously has some really, really good individual talent that can break you down off the dribble and make plays, outside of the offense. So that makes things a little bit more difficult defensively as well. I think it's important. We've talked about Tony Perkins, Scott, throughout the year as being kind of the X factor. I think you kind of know what you're going to get from Chris. Philip's been really consistent this year. Tony's that one. He's got to have a really good tournament, I think, here for them to make that run, that third guy.
Yeah, and I think it needs to come from the backcourt. And otherwise it could be a real grind. One thing I wanted to bring up when you were talking the last part here is when you look at the Nebraska game, and this is just how things are haywire for Iowa and why defense matters. If you were to tell me that Nebraska was only going to make 5 free throws, Iowa was going to shoot 21 more shots and 12 3-pointers, you would say, oh, Iowa's going to win that one easy, probably by at least 10, if not 12, 14. Well, Nebraska shot almost 59% from the floor, and then almost 54% from 3. So that shows everything that you were saying about the whole, just the craziness of Iowa and how Iowa's defense is really a limit to how they perform. But I think, as you mentioned with Tony Perkins, he has been so up and down. I mean, he had such a tremendous game against Indiana, and then just to go from 23 points to 6, and almost have a triple double against Indiana to kind of being invisible, against Nebraska.
And that should have been a good matchup for him against Nebraska. They don't have a great guards. I mean, they're okay, but he should have been able to do some damage.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just and the consistency part is what Iowa's lacked from its backcourt. I mean, Aaron Eulis has had some great games, and then he's had games where it didn't even play. They've tried to kind of, I think Josh Dix has moved ahead of DeSante Bowen. No thinking about it. He actually is ahead of him. He's helped at times, but other times he's either been invisible or not done much. He's still young. Peyton Sandfort, for the most part, has really stepped up into that role. And of course, he won the 6th Man of the Year award in the league. I think he's a guy that you could kind of count on for maybe about 10 points a game. And if he's really hot, double that. But the X factors are Tony Perkins, Aaron Eulis, Patrick McCaffrey. I mean, Patrick was great the other day, but again, what do you get on the other side of the floor? What do you get from your backcourt? Because your backcourt creates all those opportunities. If they can get into the lane and force defenders to move in and collapse on them and leave other guys open and get better shots and then get shots themselves because they're over helping and on different situations. And, really consistency out of the guard position is probably what's held Iowa back, even more than not having a true big, which I thought was going to be their problem this year.
It'll be interesting to see, Scott. We know in these tournaments where you have to win 4 games in 4 days, you have to play for the day you're on and do the best you can to advance. But as you advance, or if you advance, you got to go deeper into the bench. So we saw that last year, with Peyton Sandfort getting more meaningful minutes and, going deep into the bench. And, even Agundale and Mulvey played once they got to the weekend. So guys like Josh Dix and DeSante Bowen, and again, Mulvey and Agundale, all those guys need to be ready because they could be called upon here. And even if it's, 5 minutes, if it's 8 minutes, 10 minutes, wherever it is, you got to go in there and give the team positive minutes to help it advance.
Yeah. And that's where, one of the things I think that's been a challenge for Fran over the years has been operating his bench in the right way. Sometimes he gets certain guys in. I think Connor, I think his sons, he does a good job with, but I think some of the others that he doesn't, and so that's been that way forever. But I think you look at how you use those players, whether it's, let's say there's some free throws for the other team at 13:01 left in the first half. All right, get Rebracha out of there. Put a Gundele in there. Go play a minute and 1 second or until the next media timeout. And so you could just spell him and then get him through a timeout, eliminate the need in case he fouls or does something there. Those are the smart plays right now. If Mulvey's ahead of Gundele, do that too. Do that instead. It's just, I think, using your bench wisely, because this, if nothing else, let's say you get to Saturday, Rob, those 3 games have the potential to be an absolute grind. Games that Iowa does not do well in. Wisconsin, Michigan State, Purdue. Yeah, they're not going 3-0 there. They're just not. That's just too much. I mean, if they were playing somebody else, a Maryland or Northwestern, maybe even Illinois, they'd have a better chance. Michigan, of course. But these 3 opponents and style of play and trying to make your style fit 3 days in a row on that opponent, that's too tough to ask, I think.
I agree. These are not the best matchups for Iowa, with the potential to get Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Purdue. Maybe it's Ohio State, and that gives you a little bit more. It gives you one fewer grind.
Yeah.
Maybe. I think Philip said this yesterday on Tuesdays, March the 7th. And it's a good point. And I think it's a benefit to Iowa, but it only matters if they continue to advance. The guys on this team understand what it takes to win 4-4. They understand that they have to get rest, stay off their feet, how to navigate this. So I think that could be a benefit. But again, you have to win the games for that to matter. But they do have that experience, and that can't be a bad thing.
No, there were big wins last year. I mean, I think that was the biggest accomplishment of the Fran McCaffrey era, was be able to win the Big Ten tournament. Now, it's not as big as getting to the Sweet 16. It's just not, because winning the tournament's great, but in 30 minutes, it's a footnote. That's the worst part of it for me, is for any of the teams, but for Iowa in particular last year, it's like this great accomplishment at, the biggest one of the Fran McCaffrey era. And then in 30 minutes, it's forgotten. Who do you going to play in the NCAA tournament? And you got to get on the road and play 4 days later. So they know what to do, and they've got enough veteran core to be able to do it. It's just a matter of doing it. And they've had a lot of opportunities this year, Rob. I mean, to win some games that they should have won, and they didn't. Now, they also won some games that they probably shouldn't have won either. So they are capable, but I think
it's finding the consistency that hasn't been there all year, right? For 4 days in a row.
Right. And so I would say this is not the tournament that's going to happen in, but I think the next one could be.
Yeah.
I do think that. I think, having a day off in the middle there, as physical and a grind as this conference is, that even if they are a 7 or a 10, because the 7 and 10s are just about as interchangeable as the 8s and the 9s.
Yeah. Sometimes it's better to be the 10 than the 8 or 9.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Cause
if you get a good matchup with a 7.
Right. Because I mean, like, looking ahead a little bit here, if you're let's say you're a 10 seed or and that's kind of where I have them right now. I kind of do my own little thing based on everything. So
you're a bracketologist? I never knew this about you.
I am towards the end of the year. I got to write like 17 different intros for Sunday on the, and I get Iowa, that's good. And I got Drake, which I already finished, but yeah, I got to write like, I don't know, it's like 5 or 6 inches on each of these teams from so many leagues. And I'm like, oh no, I can't remember all of them.
Scott Lenardi.
Yeah. If you want to throw the bowl thing on me, yes, I'll take the bowl part of it. But the bracketology, no, I'm not Scotty Buckets.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I needed some laughs.
Yeah, sure. But like here's kind of where I'd have them slated right now, which is a 10 seed against San Diego State, who's a 7 in Denver, and the 2 in that region or that area would be Arizona. Tough, yes. Doable, yeah, it is. They're capable. Well, what if it's Marquette is the 2? Tough, yes. Doable, possibly. Texas, Baylor, Virginia, maybe if Virginia wins the ACC.
That's that'd be kryptonite. That's the kryptonite for this team.
Yeah, they either win by 20 or they shoot 20%. There's no real in between. It's not
pack line defense.
Yes, it's welcome to Wisconsinville. But when you look at all those, or even Gonzaga, or which one decisively, you think, okay, those are tough matchups. They're not the favorite, but they're capable of winning. And yes, they're capable of beating any team in the Big Ten. I would not predict them to beat Purdue, but any other team, sure, they can win, but they can also lose.
Yeah.
And styles matter. So
tomorrow afternoon, Thursday, March the 9th, 1:30 p.m. If you want to get a preview of the opponent, 5:30 tonight, March the 8th, Big Ten Network, Wisconsin against Ohio State. You can watch Iowa's next opponent. And we'll see. I mean, we hear that, Iowa will be the fresher team because it doesn't have to play today. And then the other side is, well, Wisconsin and Ohio State have already gotten their feet wet and they got this, their bearings and all that other stuff. It just, you can drive yourself crazy with all that stuff. It matters how well a team plays on a given day.
Well, remember the COVID tournament 2 years ago, and they played Grand Valley State, or was it Grand Canyon State? Yeah, Grand Canyon State.
That sounds like a made-up university.
Yeah, I know, and it pretty much is in the Phoenix area. But they were a 2. They played a 15. They won. And then they played Oregon, which wasn't able to play its first round game because VCU had COVID issue or whatever. And there are ways to think of it there. Hey, Iowa's now, they've got a game under their belt. They kind of figured some things out. They look good doing it, and Oregon could be rusty, or Oregon's well rested, and Iowa now is a little bit tired, and it really, and what we saw was Iowa just decided, we're not going to guard the basketball. Luka could score 36 and nobody else will do a damn thing on defense. And that's pretty much what happened. So anything's possible. And we can rationalize it any way we want to. I don't know. Are you packing for 4 days, Rob, or are you going to pack for 2?
Yeah, I was talking to our colleague, Chad Leistico yesterday, and he asked me the same question. And I was like, I learned my lesson. The two Alfords, the one where they won it, and then the one where they lost in Indianapolis, where Recker played out of his mind. They made it to the championship and lost to Ohio State. I've learned my lesson both of those times where it was not the odds were not with Iowa to advance, and Iowa did. And I was doing laundry like in the hotel because I didn't have enough clothes.
Yeah.
So I will pack for 4 days.
Okay.
And then if I don't use those clothes, then they go back in the drawer when I get home.
Yeah. Just have a divider in your suitcase. And
yes.
I had to learn that a little bit last week too in Indianapolis. Now I was there the whole time. I knew I was there, but you pack extra days because one day it just poured so bad.
Yeah.
And I even had an umbrella, and then my umbrella disintegrated in 40-mile-an-hour winds. And it's like, I'm like flying through the air like Mary Poppins and in the rain,
And there's supposed to be snow coming in here tomorrow, which is just foul. Yeah. And I don't know if that's heading to Chicago. I assume it is. So we'll probably get nailed on Thursday for the game.
Yeah.
There. So then I've got to pack. All right, do I pack like a hoodie? Do I get the winter jacket? Am I bringing gloves and this doofy hat? I mean, you got to pack for everything. It's Chicago in March.
Right. Windy City. Now you're not on the lake. It's not like you're playing on Wrigley, but or Soldier Field, but still it's not it's not a city like Indianapolis where it seems to be warmer than the surroundings. It's colder, but yeah, it's.
I'm traveling with three other guys too. Pat Hardy from Hawk Fanatic, Mike Halas from the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and Dallas Jones, who works for Hawk Fanatic. So it'll be interesting, one, what type of rent-a-car we get, and two, if people pack so much that we have to jam it into the trunk if it's a small car.
Yeah, well,
I got a mid-size, so I'm hoping for the best.
I'll give you a good story. One time, Mark and I, when we were all working for the Gazette, we went up to Wisconsin, and we got, I don't know what car it was there. It was a decent sized car size wise, but we went to Wisconsin for football, and on that Friday night, we had to go to the Steve's bar or whatever, the place where you could sell like all this beer. And I always joked that I told Mark that he looked like Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas, who had the grocery cart running around. And we had so much beer in our trunk, we ended up having to stack the suitcases on the back seat.
Spotted Cow in there?
Oh yeah, there was some Spotted Cow. There was some Capital Brewing, and as you know, with Mark, he had
breaking the law.
He spent like $300 on beer.
I believe that.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not exaggerating. I think I got 2 12-packs, Spotted Cow or something like that, and Capital Oktoberfest, because I love Oktoberfest, but it was funny. But yeah, so hopefully, I don't think anybody will be doing that, but just
we'll have to do a podcast someday with members of the media about like road trip stories. I think we could fill a podcast with that. Some crazy stuff that we've seen and experienced.
No question. One of my crazy ones, just off the cuff now, is when I was with Land of 10, and we used to do these trips to see a lot of the incoming recruits. And one weekend I went to see Jaimin Colbert in Kansas City, and I drove, and then I was driving. My sister lives in Northwest Arkansas. She was graduating from college, and I went there, and then I was driving diagonally through Arkansas to go visit Brandon Smith, just south of Memphis, and over in Mississippi. Well, as I was heading towards Fort Scott, Arkansas, and I'm in my wife's car, I'm not kidding. Out from nowhere comes this big black bear and runs across the interstate. And I had to slow down on brake. It was like, argh! And because I'm like, oh my God, if I hit this bear, my car's ruined. I might hurt it and not kill it, and then it's going to eat me. And there's all, and it
could be on cocaine.
Yeah, it could be on cocaine bear, or at least meth if it's in that part of the world. And so it was this communal. As soon as it ran across 4 lanes of traffic on an interstate across the road, you could see like drivers. We're all just kind of communally turning our heads, like, "Did you see that?" So that was something else.
That is definitely a potential podcast in the future during a slow time of year. We'll get people together to give us their best traveling stories for covering Iowa athletics.
Horse latitudes.
Yes. We'll be hitting that period here before we know it of the year when we get to May and June. All right, that'll do it for the Iowa men's basketball talk for today. We'll review the tournament next week, hopefully, if and when we can get together, and then preview where Iowa's headed in the NCAA tournament. We'll get to some women's basketball here, but I wanted to let folks know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That's sui.org, Systems Unlimited. Thank you for the support of the podcast. We're going to hear from a few more of our sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side, the little women's basketball and wrestling. So stay tuned. Thank you. And we're back. Coffee reloaded, ready to talk some Iowa women's basketball. Scott, we've got a question in the chat room from Dino. What does the women's basketball team do about the post position next year? Hannah is short for a true post.
Well, what I think is with Monica Zanano and McKenna Warnock both leaving, that I think if I were them, I think they've got 1 or 2 scholarships left. Go out and get the best coach, get the best post in the transfer portal. Who would not want to play with Caitlin Clark in the post? You see the numbers that Monica Zanano has posted. You know where they're headed, where what they've done, to back-to-back Big Ten tournament titles. This year they've got they're ranked 2nd in the country. All they're going to need is a post. So if you're a post wanting to find a great fit and score a lot of points, not worry about his defense as much. Here you go. And Iowa could be, could pick. I mean, Iowa has a collective for its women's basketball program. Not very many teams do. And you get to play with the best player in the country and in front of, record-setting crowds. I think they can they're kind of like, Alabama with football. Just take who you want, and so that's what I would do if I were them, because I think Hannah is outstanding, kind of an X factor this year, but I think she's more slated for the 4, not the 5.
Yeah, I think she's more Warnock's position, different type of player,
right?
More post than perimeter, and Warnock's kind of the opposite, but I think you get really good production out of the position. And I'll be interested to see, Scott. I mean, we didn't know a lot about Zanano before because of Megan. There's a couple of young posts on the team that, Jan Jensen is really good at developing young post players. Sharon Goodman, Addison O'Grady, Goodman coming off the ACL last year, kind of working her way back this year. I think they'll get some minutes from 1 or 2 of them, even if they got somebody from the portal. Yeah, I think you can either, if you view them as good enough to play that spot, fine. Because you don't have to, it could be Caitlin and Stolke being your 2 main scorers. It doesn't have to be that post player.
Oh, for sure. And they'll be fine, because not only do they have Stolke probably playing the 4, but you're going to have Kate Martin back, and she is just an absolute glue piece. You have
Marshall shooting the ball better now and becoming more of an offensive threat.
You have her. You also have, I don't know if Molly Davis will be back or not. I haven't heard one. I assume she didn't walk, I
haven't heard either.
You also have Kylie Feuerbach, who's been out all year with an ACL, and she kind of fit a role similar to Gabby Marshall. Was kind of a wing player, a defensive player. And Sydney Allfolder has been a really good player, playing kind of primarily that 3 position. I look at Kate Martin as kind of like Connor McCaffrey, just kind of does whatever it needs to.
Yep. I think that's a good comp.
So, they can go deep, and it's going to be about, but I do think that they'll probably get the 1 player in the portal. It'll be a post, and plug and play, one of the best posts in the country. And then from there, try to develop, whether it's Sharon Goodman or Addison O'Grady to be, good minute persons, maybe 12 to 14 minutes a game or something like that. And, cause they can go deep, and of course they have the best player in the country. So they'll be fine there.
Interesting season for Iowa. Starts the season in the top 5 and then ends the regular season in the top 5. They got into they fell out of the top 10, I think, at one point, and kind of worked their way back. And very tested team, played a very difficult non-conference schedule. Big Ten was very difficult this year comparatively to other conferences around the country. I think this team is prepared. And I said this on the mailbag yesterday, and I've said it before, I think, on here. You talk about it would be great for the Iowa men's team to make another run in the Big Ten tournament, but it's going to be judged by what it does. If it can be that team that finally gets to the Sweet 16 for the first time since Tom Davis's last year. Yeah. And this Iowa women's basketball team, after getting upset at home last year against Creighton in the second round, all the things it's accomplished this season, great, should be celebrated. But ultimately, fair or not, Scott, it's going to be judged what it does the rest of this month.
No question. And this is what leads the season to us. Everybody has the same opportunity once the tournament starts. It doesn't matter what, your seeding kind of helps you, at least your first game, if not your second too. But what we're at with it, Iowa men is if they go 1-1, that's probably an expectation in the tournament. If they go 0-2, But with the women, they've played so well and they've done so many things that anything less than a Sweet 16 is a disaster. And really, even getting to the Sweet 16 is not quite where they need to be. This is a talented team. So that adds some of the pressure. But when they've only lost twice to two top 5, top 10 teams over the last month, almost 2 months.
Yeah.
So, they won, they beat Maryland. I thought, that set the Big Ten record incredibly, Big Ten Network record in attendance the other day with, 380,000 people on BTN, which the previous record was Iowa, Indiana a couple weeks ago, which was 3,200. 32,000, 320,000. Damn it. So, and before that, the record was Iowa, Nebraska last year at like 286,000. So they're just flying up there in popularity and interest. And, they set the Big Ten record for average home attendance this year. They set the Big Ten tournament record for most in its session. They played before crowds of 9,500, 9,300, 8,500 in Minneapolis. So they're going to be playing at home. And my guess is those games will be sold out, just like the Indiana game was sold out. So expectations are at a fever pitch, higher than they were even last year. So win your 2 games at home. You might, and if they can get to the Final Four, I think that's the big accomplishment. And that's really the only thing missing out of Lisa Bluder's resume. She's the winningest coach in Big Ten history, and now she's coached the National Player of the Year in Megan Gustafson, and she should coach the National Player of the Year in Caitlin Clark. It floors me that I don't have anything against Aaliyah Boston, but she's the 19th leading scorer in the SEC. Would that happen if it was in men's basketball? Would a guy averaging 13.8 points and 9.8 rebounds be the National Player of the Year? No. Why? So I don't get it. So,
and now at this point, Scott, you've got Aaliyah Boston on the number 1 team, but Caitlin Clark's on the number 2 team if you go by the rankings. So it's not like you're just going with somebody who fills the stat sheet. It's somebody who's led their team to a Big Ten tournament championship and the number 2 ranking going into the NCAA tournament.
It's not like Troy Davis when he was at Iowa State, gaining 2,000 yards on a team that won 5 games. This is the Big Ten tournament champion, number 2 team in the country. And she's the most exciting player in the sport, who's second or third in scoring. And I think first in assists nationally. It's a no brainer to me. She's got to be the Player of the Year. And and to do otherwise is just disingenuous. I think it's intellectually dishonest.
Yeah, it's silly to me. Very silly. I think, we talked about what the men could accomplish in the Big Ten tournament by winning and advancing as far as it can. I think the women winning the Big Ten tournament really was beneficial in terms of avoiding the monster, the giant of South Carolina. Because now, regardless of whether Iowa gets a 1 seed, which it could, or one of the top 2 seeds, it's going to avoid South Carolina, as you said, potentially until it gets to that Final Four.
Right. And women's basketball always seeds things just a little bit differently than men's. They do things a little bit to spice up some matchups. Like last year, tried to set up Iowa State in the Sweet 16, and it didn't quite work out.
Putting asses in the seats, Scott.
Yes. We've seen it before where Iowa probably didn't deserve a 4 seed, but it got one. And,
yep.
And Well, now they're going to try to get these two teams to play, because if you're getting Aaliyah Boston versus Caitlin Clark on the final game of the season, that's going to set ratings records. That's absolutely what. And unfortunately, I'm going to be in Japan that day. But anyway,
Lost in translation.
Yes, it'll be.
You'll be watching that thing at like 3:00 in the morning.
I know. It'll be. My wife definitely be watching it. So, so I could see them, if they're not a 1, I could see them being a 2 seed. That's maybe like the 6th overall. So they're with the 3, something like that. So then they could feed into the Final Four, where they're still opposite South Carolina, or they could say, you know what, that's too much work. We're not going to think about that. Like, kind of like the World Cup trying to negotiate England, Germany. It's like, if you can get that matchup at any time, it's going to be fire. You'd like for it to be in the finals, but you know what, if you can't get it there, get it somewhere. So, as long as it's not in the regionals, because that would be a disservice to the sport, frankly.
Yeah, I would agree. And they'll do what they can to, I'm going to bring up the women's net rankings now. Just again, I'm with you, Scott. I've got issues with these net rankings. They just don't make a lot of sense sometimes, but it's the analytic system that the NCAA does use. And Iowa right now is 6, as you said. Indiana is 5. South Carolina, UConn, LSU, Stanford, Indiana, Iowa, followed by Utah, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, and Duke. That's your top 10. Some really good teams in there. Even if you avoid South Carolina, I just want people to know Scott and I are saying it's going to be a smooth trip to the Final Four. I mean, it's UConn, Stanford. UConn's already beat them, correct?
Yeah. And, it would be really funny for, there have been, it's kind of a mix of Iowa State fans and how they think of Caitlin Clark. There have been some who've been very supportive of her because of women's basketball and what she's doing for the sport. And then there's some that say, I just can't root for a Hawkeye. Well, if they play LSU with their coach, what they remember so fondly at Baylor, if it's like, say, in the regional finals, LSU versus Iowa, and I imagine that there's probably some, negative memories of when Baylor beat Iowa a few years ago with Megan Gustafson, because, she's not the most engaging coach to teams that play against her. That's for sure. And then
she seemed to go out of her way to kind of discredit Megan's accomplishments in the pregame press conference. I remember that.
Yeah. And, they've won decisively. And then I think they have Angel Reese too. So,
really good player.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look statistically, she buries Aaliyah Boston. That's why I think South Carolina is the best team in the country. And I think South Carolina will win the NCAA tournament, even if they play Iowa. But I struggle with somebody with those statistics. And I'm not saying she's not great, but it's kind of like having an offensive lineman win the Heisman. It just, I don't know. You can be Ndamukong Suh on the defense or whatever. And it's just, I struggle with it.
Yeah, no doubt. And we will find out Sunday the opponents for both the Iowa men and women in the NCAA tournament Sunday after I think the men are up first, right? And then they do the women's tournament. They usually do the men's tournament shortly after the Big Ten championship.
5 o'clock.
Big Ten tournament championship is completed.
Yeah, 5 o'clock for them. So there could be a half-hour grace period where they're talking and everybody's going, "Come on, let's just get to the brackets." And, and then Rob, I don't know what you think about this, but when it comes to the bracket reveal, my preference would be almost, I can't believe I'm saying this, almost like the college football playoff reveal, which is I would rather see all the tournaments end on Saturday and then have the reveal like at 11:30 Sunday morning. Or something like that. And then, and then the women there, because the logistics are more difficult for this than any other thing we ever do. I mean, going to Seattle that one time.
Yep.
You're talking, we had to send, and you and I in Iowa were at the same site. So it was me and Halas and a photographer. And I mean, you're talking about $1,000 plus plane tickets on short notice, trying to get all the way across the country. And
that train ride from the airport to downtown to the media hotel. I remember that. I was like, where the hell are we?
Yeah, right. It took forever. And you're thinking, well, that's not fun. But what about Spokane when they go there? What about Boise? What about Sacramento this year? It could be Sacramento.
Des
Moines for other people.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I think you would give the teams and fans that extra day, that extra Sunday afternoon into Monday morning to try to work out their travel arrangements. And that would be beneficial. But alas, it's TV, and CBS wants that Big Ten championship on leading into the reveal. And we see it this week. You've got the West Coast Conference playing its championship game last night because ESPN wants St. Mary's and Gonzaga prime time they're going to do this every day this week to get that marquee game every night. And then you have that unevenness of which teams get layoffs, which teams don't. But it's all about the Benjamins, Scott.
Yeah, it sure is. And the other part is, this is one of my biggest gripes with the sport is that when you look at all the one bid leagues, everything they've done short of this week is for nothing.
Yep.
It's all about this. I mean, Bradley beats Drake in a winner take all for the Valley Championship. Then they have a rematch a week later. Drake blows them out. Bradley's going to the NIT now instead. And then you can go up and down the lineup of those types of teams, the Horizon League,
Northern Arizona's in. They're like 11-17 or something. They're in their conference championship game, which is played tonight against Montana State. What is that? The Big Sky?
Yeah, the Big Sky. Kennesaw won the Sun, and I think Liberty was really good. And and that's up and down. It's not just this one. The Ohio Valley, you've got SEMO, and their net is 244. But they're in. They were like the fourth seed in that league. I don't know. I mean, I know there's going to be a push for expansion of the tournament to 96.
That's coming.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. My thought is almost to the point of, if you're going to get to 96, just let everybody in and do it where you have, say, 96 buys, and then everybody else is in like a kind of like a district tournament format, like say the last weekend, you have 8 teams, one site, 3 straight days, and then the winners advance, and then you have 128 teams and start playing it from there. Because when you start going too much bracket creep, the what has been the most entertaining aspect of why the NCAA tournament's been so popular for the last, almost 40 years is the bracket. It's the office pools, it's the friends, and now we can do it online and it's easy. And
people that don't pay attention to the sport the entire season, but they get that bracket and win.
Yes. Oh my God.
I'm going to pick the mascots.
Yeah, right. Back in the late 90s, my wife won a pool because she'd never heard of Gonzaga, but it's kind of a neat name. Yeah. And in 2002, well, I'm going to pick Maryland because, my name's Meredith and it's kind of like Maryland, and they won the effing tournament, they beat Indiana that year. And, just stuff like that, where you're like, I'm sitting here over analyzing it, going, well, like we've just done for the last hour.
You do matchups. Okay. They play a slow pace, tempo, big, they've got good bigs. This has a good back. This team has a good backcourt, and then none of it matters.
Yeah. None of it matters. It's a flip of the coin. And then you're like, and because then you rack your brain and you kill yourself going, I could see this going either way. And then it does go either way because it's, the tournament and it's great. But if you will start going too far deep, I think you could push some of those people away.
I would agree.
And then it becomes the niche sport that it is all year, and that's not good. So in some ways, I'm like, maybe you ought to just, all right, hey, Northern Iowa, you're the 5th seed in the 28th district at Minneapolis or North Dakota, or something like that. You have 32 sites, 8 teams roughly at each site. I don't know. I'm talking out of my, but
No, it's interesting. I think there are a lot of ways that they can look at going. I would just leave it, but
Yeah, right. Well, that's be my first choice too.
I don't like change for the most
Yeah.
part, other than the college football playoff expanding.
Yeah.
But that's because it's not what the NCAA tournament is now, but it can be something comparative with expansion. So looking forward to that. Let's take our last break here, Scott, and we'll come back. We'll talk just a little bit about wrestling and kind of look forward to look back at Big Ten and forward to the Nationals. And then we'll catch everybody up a little bit on the football off the field stuff, and then we'll wrap it up for the week. Stay tuned. We are back. Thank you to our sponsors helping us bring you these podcasts for free. Good time to let folks know that most weeks we have a fresh Hawkeye-centric podcast every day, Monday through Friday. As we talked about at the lead into this podcast, we're usually on Thursdays, so you're going to get 2 today. But you're going to get your fill of Hawkeye podcasts on this feed Monday through Friday, and then we have some other prospect podcasts and some other special podcasts we do. So hit that like button, smash the subscribe button, or whatever the kids say, and check us out on the Hawk Fanatic podcast feed. Scott, not unexpected, last weekend in Ann Arbor, Penn State wins the Big Ten wrestling championship after winning the regular season, and going to be tough at national as well. I thought Iowa counted pretty well for itself. Obviously, Spencer Lee is on a direct course to be the 5th 4-time national champion. Is that right? I think there have been 4. He would be number 5 if I remember correctly. I could be off on that, and I apologize if I am. Real Woods, Big Ten champion. Patrick Kennedy finished 2nd, wrestled really well. Lost to the kid from Wisconsin, Hillman. So I can't remember his name. Apologize to he and his family, because I know they're listening to the podcast. But they're going to need Jacob Warner to be better, Scott. They're going to need other guys to wrestle 2 at least and above their seeds heading into this thing.
Yeah, that's always the key when you're kind of the number 2 team in the country, is that you're going to have your best wrestlers wrestling to, at minimum, their seed, if not beyond it. And then you're going to have other guys who get everything you can get, an extra bonus point here. If you're up 8-1 with 30 seconds left, cut your guy loose and try to get that extra takedown to get the major, get the near, go for the fall. If you're in a tough match, try to advance an extra round, win an extra place, and then of course win the championships. And they've got a pretty good team. The thing is, Penn State has some home run hitters. That's going to be very difficult to get. But, seeing Patrick Kennedy, first of all, get 2nd place was, in the way he wrestled, I thought was really strong. I think Max Murin, and who got 3rd, I think he's capable of getting something like that similarly on the stage. Tony Cassiope, same way. What you're going to need are the other guys, the guys that just, didn't perform up to expectations, or you feel like there's something more out there. Jacob Warner has always been that guy. He got to the finals last year. That was great, but you always feel like you could do more. The match against Minnesota was just the most anti-Iowa match ever. Holding on, and then give up a late takedown to lose. And I think, and then guys like, Brody Teske, Nelson Brands. I'm kind of glad Nelson Brands doesn't get the legacy ding that is possible. And maybe if he was better, it would be more difficult for him. But you'd like to see him not only be an All-American, but maybe get to Friday night. Abe Assad, heard a lot about Abe over the years. Time to go out and do it. Go wrestle, maybe get to Friday night. And then, of course, Spencer Lee, work your magic. Now there's another one who I think is going for, and I can't pronounce his name. He's going for 4 in a row as well. So he could be alone. And then Real Woods, There you go.
I think Sebrecht's got potential too when he wrestles up to his capabilities. But I mean, that's easier to, you're everybody in the country is trying to wrestle to their capability. And then, it just takes one off match and, then you've got to fight your way back. And I'm with you. I give Cassiope and Mirren credit at Big Tens. They overcame the disappointment of getting knocked out of the championship bracket and wrestled back to third place. That's a good sign.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're capable of, they're guys that you'd like to succeed. And you never know. I mean, there can be an upset. It's not like Cassiope is not capable of beating, Kirk Follett from Penn State on a great day. It's going to take his best match, but he's capable of doing it. You're just going to need your elite guys to continue to be elite. And I think Spencer Lee and Real Woods are definitely capable of that. And then it's going to take your middle guys, Kennedy, Mirren, Cassiope, Warner, to say, we're going to go just a little bit farther than what we've done before. And then it's going to take your other guys to win as many matches as possible. If you get back in the wrestle backs, if you lose in the quarters, wrestle up as far as you can and win those matches in the margins. And, Iowa was back far for sure for Penn State. Penn State's got an elite level team. It's Penn State's championship to lose, but it's also, Iowa wins some matches in the margins, gets an upset. One of the Penn State wrestlers gets upset. It could come down to Saturday night. And that's all you can really ask for. If say Iowa can get 3 on Saturday night, win at least 2, and maybe a Max Mirren or Patrick Kennedy or Warner gets in a position where you never know, and then don't lose by a major decision. Fight when you're down 7-1, and he lets you up, and it's 8-1. Don't get taken down. Don't stall. Fight. Maybe get a takedown. It's just the smallest of the details could be the difference. Maybe in winning a title. It's not the predicted part, but also making sure that you're strongly second at worst.
Put pressure on the heavy favorite come late in the tournament. Make sure they have to think about, Iowa's right behind us. Put pressure on them. And then see where the chips fall. Sky, let's wrap up with updating the off the field storylines from this week as it pertains to Iowa football, University of Iowa athletics, politicians in the state. It's been a wild week to say the least, and we're only on hump day. But since we talked on Monday, and again, I'll refer people back to Monday's podcast if they want to get more in-depth our thoughts on this. Predictably, Kirk Ferentz came out later on Monday, and basically what Scott said on Monday's podcast is the coaches wanted to fight this and see it through. They weren't able to do that based on the state wanting it to go away. Today, our colleague Chad Leistico from the Register talked to the lawyer for the plaintiffs in this case, the former Iowa football players, who said this is vindication. Again, these are predictable reactions from the parties involved. We're not going to sit here and try to change your mind and direct how you feel about this. There's plenty of great information out there. Chad's done a good job. Scott's done a good job. Go read their stories. You'll be able to find out, what happened from an objective standpoint, and you'll be able to draw your own conclusions. That's that. I think for me, Scott, and we talked about this before recording, the most interesting aspect of this is the future of Gary Barta. Barbara Wilson, the president of the University of Iowa, was requested for an interview. Somebody in her office or she replied to Chad saying they weren't interested, which was a bad look. I mean, decline the interview, but not interested, that's just tone deaf to me. So I think for me, Scott, is what is going on over there behind closed doors? What is going on with Gary? How is Gary Barta viewed here? I mean, you had Rob Sand and then the state treasurer ripping him apart. in a political setting. I'm just wondering what's going on here. And I know it's not easy for you to know. I mean, we're going to have to speculate a little bit here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we can say is there are significant political headwinds in his direction, and there are people who, kind of like, you use your analogy you want, sharks circling, they smell blood, and sometimes they go after people like this. That Gary Barta, as let's kind of parse this as much as possible. Gary Barta is not a popular figure in this state,
and it's a hard position to be popular in.
Right. Jamie Pollard is a very popular person with his fan base. And part of that is Jamie's done an outstanding job for Iowa State, and he's willing to just, rah, 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 Iowa State, thumb your nose at Iowa. Gary is more of your classic administrator, and he's been in the position for 17 plus years. So he's got a lot of skeletons in the closet. He's got a lot of things people don't like him for. You could start with things like Kirk Ferentz's 10-year contracts, Fran McCaffrey's long contracts with a heavy buyout. The same thing with Kirk Ferentz's buyouts. You could talk about the other discrimination lawsuits, the Jane Myers, the Title IX.
Brian Ferentz being employed. Brian
Ferentz being employed. How he handled dropping sports, and then losing the Title IX lawsuit and having to add the women's sport he cut, plus add another one that wasn't even there. So you have this background against him. You also look, and then, hey, the way they spent their money during COVID and why they had to take out a $50 million loan. Other people didn't. Ohio State did, but Ohio State prints money. So you had that part of it. There are a lot of issues going on and play. But the politicians over the years can stand on their chairs and yell, but everybody just shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's self-supporting financially. There's really nothing you can complain about other than the fact it's University of Iowa. Now it's only $2 million. But after this, now they have the opportunity to get their teeth into it. And they love this grandstanding opportunity. Rob Sand has been, he's, again, if you're a Democrat, you love him. If you're not, you don't. But he has taken the opportunity to go after financial institutions that have abused public trust. And he believes Gary Barta has done that. And when you're talking about 4 lawsuits that they've lost and $11 million, hey, it's there for the taking, and then there's some other legislators who, have gotten on their high horse and I laugh at them. They're weak people. And they always seem to not understand the way the world works. But I think things right now are very dicey for Gary Barta. And Barbara Wilson being the president of the University of Iowa, and relatively new one, she doesn't have the history with Gary Barta that Sally Mason or Bruce Harrell did. And Bruce always had Gary's back, no matter what was happening. And Sally seemed to as well. What is Barbara Wilson going to do? I agree with you. It's not a good look to say it that way. You could just say, she is not going to comment at this time. Not that we're not interested.
We're reviewing, whatever, just not that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the worst response you can pretty much give. So when you're, a $1 billion operation. So what does this mean for Gary? I would say it's not good. I'll just put it there. I'm not saying that he can't survive, but I'm going to say when you have this much,
got a year left on his contract.
You're on his contract, this much political opposition, I would say, and there are other people who are not in favor of him either, who are not necessarily political or who used to be political. I would say that things do not look great for him being the athletic director long term. However, that I'm not predicting that he will lose his job. I just think that
he has some powerful people in his corner too.
He does. So depending on what Barbara Wilson thinks, I think that's probably, she's the one figure that can make or break it. If she figures you know what, I'm going to throw him out. He's the pound of flesh. Okay. If she's like, hey, this is the one of the topics I'm going to make a stand against, and I don't care who's on the other side, there she is. But I would say that Gary is not the most popular figure among Iowa fans anyway. So, if it was Kirk Ferentz, that's different. But Gary himself, he could be the sacrificial lamb for these topics.
And not to, try to defend Gary, but he is in a different position than Jamie Pollard. Jamie Pollard is the most powerful guy in that athletic department. Yeah, Matt Campbell is building his power up like Kirk has done over 25 years. So Gary's got to he's got to dance with different people. He's got to, please different people. And he's not in the easiest spot here. That said, he hasn't handled that position well in really public situations, lawsuits being a big part of that.
No question. You're right. Jamie Pollard is the most, I'll be honest, he's the most important figure in Iowa State sports history. He has done what he has done at Iowa State over the last 17, 18 years is nothing short of remarkable, because if you would have started talking about realignment in 2005 or 2006, Iowa State's on the outside looking in, and he's made them a very strong program. I mean, whether it's filling up Jack Trice Stadium when Paul Rhodes was there, let alone when Matt Campbell's there, and making Iowa State an attractive university for a lot of people. And he solidified the fan base in Des Moines. They're now the most popular team in Des Moines. That was not necessarily the case 20 years ago. I think when you look at Gary, he operates differently, and it's easier to take shots at Gary because Jamie will take shots back. Jamie will fight back, right or wrong. Gary has not been that way. Now you look at Iowa's success athletically, it's at as good of a level. It's better than it was in the 80s, frankly. I mean, we all look at the 80s as some sort of golden era, and it was. But when you look at the football program, last year was a disappointing year at 8-5. That's not the worst year of the Kirk Ferentz era. You look at women's basketball has won back-to-back Big Ten championships. Wrestling might get second this year, and that sucks, but that's second in the country. You look at men's basketball. They won the Big Ten title last year. You look at baseball. They're ranked. They beat the number one team in the country. You look at track. You look at field hockey.
Field hockey, yeah.
All of these sports, Iowa is competing at a good or better level than they ever have, and under his watch. So that has to be taken into account. It's just, I think the Iowa fan base, Rob, has been kind of battered enough to where they're angry enough to where they want somebody to pay for it. They want somebody to pay for their frustration. And it's from coming close in basketball. It's from coming close in football. It's from Ferentz's contract. It's from Brian Ferentz's offense. It's from their lawsuits, the losses, the national laughing stock during 2015. They want somebody to pay for it. And damn it, if it's Gary Barta, that's what they want. And at some point, you kind of got to give them that, right or wrong, or fair or unfair. And I kind of think that he's probably, again, going to be the sacrificial lamb for this. And if that happens and people want to know, okay, who's going to replace him? I think they got the best possible replacement right there in Beth Getz. She had an even more difficult situation in Minnesota when she had to replace Norwood Teague. And she did an outstanding job there. She went to Ball State. She was great there. She's been in all kinds of levels, widely respected. When I saw her come here, I thought, okay, there's succession plan at its finest, because Gary will be 60 this year. Not to say that, and it's in a business where that part of the business, guys don't work till they're 80, unlike football. Yeah. So, but anyway, that I'm getting a little bit ahead here, but I do think that it's going to be tough to die this down if you're Gary Barta. I think the winds are really whipping, and because you're using state money now, it is legitimately state money, and it's not the way they wanted it. And the athletic department could say, we'll just pay you back. It still doesn't matter. It comes out of state coffers.
Yes. And as we know, if because we followed the story, Scott, I mean, all of those, it all fell into certain place. You remove the coaches. Now the state's involved. Well, we're not, the coaches aren't involved. We're not we're not being directly implicated here. So we're not paying it all out of the athletic fund. You want to, settle this as a state. You're going to have to pay for some of it. It all kind of plays into it. I think really you mentioned this on Monday's podcast, how, Gary Barta's tenure, how it ranks among other athletic directors in the country. Kirk Ferentz is the longest tenured football coach. With those long tenures, you build up critics. You build up people that want something different. You fight apathy. All of those things take into place. I think it's fair to say within the next 5 years, there'll be a new AD and a new head football coach. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you can see a lot of new,
and that changes the whole dynamic. We talked about Jeremy Pollard being, so maybe the next athletic director is the most powerful over whoever the next football coach is.
And, remember the other two athletic directors that came before him. I mean, Iowa's had incredible stability at that position, more so than any other team. Football coach and athletic director, arguably the two most important positions in any athletic department at this level. They've had more stability, over the last 40 to 50 years than any other, administration in the country. And that says a lot for Iowa in a good way. Bump Elliott was more, everybody respected Bump Elliott. He was behind the scenes, but he'd been in that position. He'd been a football coach. Hayden was front and center. He was behind him, but Hayden wasn't going to cross Bump Elliott.
No,
he knew what he had there. And Bump Elliott also hired Lute Olson and Dan Gable and Tom Davis and George Raveling. And, he hired a couple of bad football coaches, but he hit it out of the park, grand slam with Hayden Fry. And then you look at Bob Bowlesby. Make no mistake, Bob Bowlesby was the boss. He was a lot more like Jamie Pollard in my eyes, maybe just because, and Bob's great at his job. You didn't have to agree with him.
And he hired Kirk. Gary did not.
Right. And this is what's also fascinating, that Gary and Kirk have the longest AD coach relationship in the country. And Kirk was in year, 7 or 8 at that point when Gary got hired. And Gary got hired 17 years ago. So it's weird when we think, well, yeah, but wow. I mean, Gary's been there 17 years. I mean, that's like 4th or 5th in tenure, and Pollard's just slightly above him by like 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable, but yeah, I think we're going to see, again, Gary will be 60 this year. Kirk will be 68. I don't think in 5 years either one's going to be in that job, no matter what happens this year. And then you look at, Lisa Bluter, and she was hired by Christine Grant. Tom Brands was hired by Bowlesby, and, Bowlesby took one on the chin there, but I mean, I should say that a better analogy is took the bull by the horns and felt like he needed to do something different. And he did. So Gary, other than Fran, didn't hire a major coach. I mean, Heller's in baseball, but baseball's not basketball.
Yep.
And with Gary hiring Fran, it was after Licklider, and some people have brought that up, and I'm like, look, that's so long ago now. It really doesn't matter. And if you're going to hate on him for hiring Lick, despite Lick's accolades, then you got to give him props for saying, you know what, I made a mistake 3 years into it and cut the cord. And I think you need to do that. And whether Fran gets Iowa to the next level or not, he has solidified the program. I mean, there's 2 programs in the Big Ten over 10 years that have had 1 or fewer losing seasons, Iowa and Michigan State. And he's one of them. That says a hell of a lot. So,
it's always about what you want, right, Scott? What your expectations are, and it's different for everybody. And I was looking at this yesterday for the mailbag. If you add the COVID year, which Iowa would have made the tournament, this would be 5 years in a row making the tournament. Exactly. Is that your bar, or is the bar Sweet 16 every season, or, whatever it is, but that's up to the individual.
Yeah. And that's part that makes it tough for Iowa fans is that the Iowa football team goes to bowl games every year. It even goes to Indianapolis. They did 2 years ago, and it did it 7 or 8 years ago. The men's basketball team wins a Big Ten tournament. It goes to the tournament every year. The women's basketball team wins the tournament, wins the regular season, wins in the tournament. And the wrestling team has had its success, but it's also been second more often than not in the last 10 years. All that adds up. And it's like, you just want that run the race and win the race. And
you want the one shining moment.
Yeah. And for the men's basketball team, it's the Sweet 16. But what if it's this year? What if they go to the Sweet 16 as a 7 seed? Does that mean it's all roses and ice cream for everybody?
Does that fix everything that you've criticized?
No, because they're going to go and they'll get beat by 15 points. And then it's like, oh, yeah. Well, why don't you get to the Final Four? We haven't been to one of those in 40 plus years. If Lisa gets to the Final Four, but then they lose, you have the best player in the country. Why can't you win a championship? If Kirk actually gets to Indianapolis and wins, gets the playoff, but gets beat, like what would have happened in 15 if they force a fumble with LJ Scott at the goal line, and then they go and get beat by Alabama the same way they did by Stanford. But well, that's the problem right now, that we've just kind of got this Superman 3 effect with the fan base, where it's not kryptonite, but it's like kryptonite with tobacco, and everybody's just surly,
Yeah.
It's winning football games, but it's not winning football games where you're beaten by 30 points. It's 13-10, and you don't like that.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, no doubt about that. Great episode, great Twilight Zone episode. Let's end it there, Scott. We will see change in Iowa athletics coming up here in the next several 5, 7, 10, some type of years here. These guys can't coach and administrate forever, but we'll be back hopefully next week to talk to you folks about the latest happenings in Iowa athletics. A lot going on in March. Scott and I will do our best to try to hook up next week, depending on where our paths take us on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate all of our sponsors, and we hope to talk to you again next week. But if not, we will talk to you soon. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.